Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Enterprise AI isn't just a tool, it's the heartbeat of smart organizations like yours, helping to reinvent work to deliver higher growth, more customers, and better experiences. Join us as we discover how AI-powered work orchestration and automation is making things better for everyone: customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Transform Now. I'm Brad Hairston.
And I'm Michael Marchuk.
And this is our weekly pulse check, taking a look at the news around automation and AI and honing in on a few articles that caught our attention this week. So, Michael, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first article comes from TechCrunch, and the title is OpenAI Research Lead Noam Brown thinks certain AI reasoning models could have arrived decades ago. Now, Noam Brown, he does lead the reasoning research at OpenAI, and in an interview recently said, these reasoning models that are now starting to come out, I mean, this whole thing is really catching momentum, this chain of thought type of methodology. He's saying, hey, we were using this 20 years ago. So what did we learn from the article overall that you think might be good food for thought going forward, Michael?
Well, it's interesting. So they are talking about this capability of hey, we've done this before. This is something that we should have picked up on earlier. I think this is part of all of the research and all of the discoveries that we find. Oftentimes it's based on something that had already been discovered a while back, but is now being applied in maybe a slightly different way. And taking that approach where you're bringing multiple disciplines together, or in this case here, just reapplying some type of logic that you would use to solve a different problem towards a new problem, can really, find a unique way of doing things. To his point of, we could have figured this out 20 years ago. Well, yeah, you could have, but we didn't have the same problems 20 years ago. We didn't have large language models that have, hundreds of gigabytes of data that are being used with thousands of GPU cores crunching all the same time to do all this stuff. We didn't have that 20 years ago. So I agree with him that the concept of thinking and thinking about stuff rather than what he described as a brute force approach to solving a problem makes a lot of sense. This kind of gets back to thinking about the whole concept of gaming. Chess, you have these kind of moves, and by the olden days, games would memorize or have all these moves memorized in their memory, and then would draw from them to look several steps ahead and say, I see a pattern based on what I have programmed into me. And then AlphaGo came along and learned how to play the game using just the rules, because it'd be impossible to do the whole brute force type of thing. So it leveraged the concept of this reasoning method to be able to play that game, right? And so as we see the same kind of concept, you're using a similar approach. Let's think about it first, because that's what humans do. We think about things. Not to say that there's plenty of times we have the gut instinct kind of thing where we act first and think later, and because we've done it many times, or whatever. But the idea is that applying this thinking model to it here is an interesting process. They finally realized that, hey, we can take what we've learned in the past in gameplay and apply it to the thinking process for solving real problems. And that may allow us to be more effective with our large language model usage.
Right. And, Noam Brown, when he talks about 2 decades ago, he's referring to when he was at Carnegie Mellon, and they developed an AI that was able to beat some of the top poker players in the world. And, at the time, you're exactly right. The data that they were putting into these models, the way they trained them, I mean, that was very different, almost rudimentary compared to today. So it's amazing that he was able to develop kind of this reasoning model But he's excited now about how, it can go so much further and it can have more applicability with the technology, with the compute power, with all those things that we have today. And speaking of compute power, he was asked in the same interview about higher ed, and because he came from higher ed, what's their ability to really advance AI and do research in this area? And he's concerned about it because the compute intensive nature of it is really a constraint that higher ed cannot get around. And now there've been more cuts to government grants, to colleges and such. So that's having an impact. So very, very interesting piece from him. And we could call him maybe the father of chain of thought. COD.
Yeah, there you go. Can a real human poker player get a tell from an AI? Or is their poker face that good? The AI poker face.
It's a great question. And as we talked about last week, if it's a deep fake image, the eyes are not going to look real. You can't look into their eyes. All right, well, let's move on to article number 2. So this one comes from CIO, and it's titled, How to Know a Business Process is Ripe for Agentic AI. Now, Michael, we know that there is a ton of momentum around the whole agentic AI area, and everything you read about in the media, in social media in particular, is go, go, go. Everyone needs to rush in this direction as fast as possible. So this was a nice article to see saying, hey, let's take pause. There's some things that need to be figured out before you move in this direction. So what did you learn from the article that you found to be useful, and anything about the article that you didn't like as well?
So my first blush after reading through this was, if you just remove the agentic AI from the title, how to know a business process is ripe for automation instead of agentic AI. And nearly everything applies the same way. It's all about, the ROI. How are we going to make the ROI work for this particular thing? If in fact the business process can be automated, what other steps are in there for applying this? Do we have the technology to be able to manage it, et cetera, et cetera? So there are a lot of things that are, or you're reliant on this stuff, the data and the way that you approach the data, et cetera. So to me, that's one aspect of it. I think I agree with 100% that yes, in fact, regardless if it's agentic AI or RPA or any other kind of automation or technology you apply to it, do we have the right infrastructure, meaning data, the system is that are working behind the scenes, do we understand the process well enough? All of those things apply no matter what technology you apply to this concept of automating. But the idea behind it is beyond that, beyond the fact that we're looking for this, this viewpoint. Where do we see this impact within our organization being a positive one for its outcome? So let's not look at the technologies. Let's look at the outcomes that we're trying to do. Is it right to look at everything as, in this case here, agentic? And that they're obviously, this is an article about agentic, so they're going to be very focused on that. But they even say within here that agentic AI right now is extremely complex, and the benefits in terms of the ROI are not very well understood. So when you start applying AI agents to things, there's a lot of costs associated with it in terms of compute costs, but also the ability to have the right access to the data and whatnot that you didn't necessarily have to think about when you're using more traditional types of automation, whether that's RPA or something else. So that's one thing that I took out of it. The other part of it is applying the right technology to the right problems. So again, agentic AI is, like you said, take the magic wand and weave it. It's all agentic now, and the world is a happy place, right? Reality is that that's not necessarily the case. There are technologies that you can apply that will provide you with the benefits that you want, but identifying which technologies are the right technologies and whether or not you even need to change those technologies. We start looking at the way they apply it here with customer service. Should we look at customer service? I think it's a great idea. And we've talked about this in prior episodes. Customer service is ripe for this kind of agentic interaction. And so this is one, well, yes, this sounds like a great idea for us to see the new capabilities and apply those in ways that our customers can benefit from. So that is definitely one. But when we start looking at like everything else, let's go on a case by case basis. Does it make sense to simply pull this out, whatever we have, whether it's a manual process or another automation process, and replace it with agentic AI? And the answer to that may be no, mainly because the world revolves around rules. And when you start looking at operating a business or doing anything, there's usually rules that go from point A to point B. And oftentimes it can be more effective, more cost effective, leveraging more traditional automation than bringing in agentic AI, which would then have to understand all of the rules with all of the data to make a conclusion, which would look nearly identical to if one you had set up with a more traditional automation approach. So is agentic the magic fix all? I don't think it is. Does it have some amazing capabilities that we could leverage as part of a specific process or within processes? Absolutely. I mean, this is a great technology. It's applying it at the right place at the right time, ensuring that you have the right factors around that, be able to support it.
Yeah, I really like the first part of the article better than the second. The first part talks about things you need to have in order before doing agentic. All of those made sense to me, like a mission, care and feeding, compliance, understand business continuity. What if the agent stops working? How do you continue on? Those things all made sense. I think when he starts talking about the sweet spots for agentic later, it's like he tries to cover everything. And he even mentioned some things that I think today are working very well with RPA and intelligent automation and other methods. So I don't know why he felt the need to try to cover everything. I would focus agentic on the processes that are not automated. And if there are rules that need to be factored in, stay away from it. We talked last week, as you mentioned, about the Gartner article about customer service being a great place for agentic, resolving customer issues, doing it even proactively. I mean, that's a great example where I think it can have an impact. So that part I didn't care for as much, but there were some good takeaways. Okay, article number 3 comes from Beyond Radio. This is a UK site, and it's titled Lancaster University Summer School to Tackle the Rise of AI Scams. So Michael, the Lancaster University, their linguistics and English language department is consistently ranked number 3rd in the world. And they are hosting a summer school program that's looking at AI, and they're going to figure out or examine the rise of deep fakes and scams and fraud that is all underpinned by AI. And they're going to try to help people figure out how to combat that. So what did you take away from this article, Michael?
Well, a couple things. I mean, the idea behind some of the, one of the things they mentioned was a news story that happened a while ago where there was a CFO who transferred a whole lot of money, and he was attending a call where there were other executives on the call. Unfortunately, he was the only real person on the call. Everyone else was a deep fake. So as these deep fakes are all agreeing, yes, we should probably send all this money off. Yes, we should transfer it right away. That's a great idea. The CFO, dutifully complied and sent off quite a lot of money. The idea behind this is, and I'm not sure who our target market is for this, but certainly, as you and I have talked about before, identifying deep fakes is becoming much more difficult for folks, even for folks who've been around for a while who understand this to a certain extent. But for folks who are, say, lesser experienced, or those who aren't necessarily in the technology fields, this can produce some anxiety as to whether or not, in fact, is this really a person? Is this not a person? Are they trying to coax me into doing something that I really shouldn't do? So we talked about before, there are, I'm sure, lots of really good reasons to have some sort of, I wouldn't call it a deep fake, but some kind of AI generated technology for either entertainment or marketing purposes. But when you start driving into this part where you're actually impersonating someone,
Yeah.
you really run the risk of moving more towards some nefarious activities. So I think this is really good for helping, I would say, non-technical people understand the risks and maybe prepare themselves for that. I mean, I know in our town, they'll have every once in a while, the police department will put on a small seminar for the elderly folks in town to help them understand how to, deal with phone scams and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I liken it to that, but maybe on a much more elevated basis with a lot more data behind it, rather than simply talking to elderly folks.
The fact that they have a class on this,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of legitimizes the fact that this is a big problem.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're going to apply their linguistic
The linguistics.
expertise.
Yes.
I mean, that really, that's what stuck out to me. We've talked a lot about our exploration of these AI generated like avatars and how convincing they are, not just the video, but also the fact that once you create the avatar and you put whatever text into it that you want, and it says it back, it's doing it with your gestures, your inflection, your tone.
Right.
There's so much about it that blows me away. And as we discussed last week on our last Pulse Check with another article about deepfakes, this is an area that I think is potentially can be used in a lot of good ways, but an equal number of bad ways. And so I do expect some regulations around this at some point, whether that's in the US or Europe or somewhere else.
Yeah. I imagine regulations will be helpful, but I don't think it'll stop the people who are doing the scams.
No, maybe the punitive side of that will, if you use a deep fake to rob a bank or ruin someone's reputation. I mean, they need to have harsh penalties for stuff like that. But you're right, it's so hard. Just like it's hard to find and catch hackers that hold people ransom. Banks are going to be similar, I'm sure.
Yep.
All right, the fourth article and final article for today. This is from the Register. It's titled "Writing for Humans?" ? Perhaps in the future, we'll write specifically for AI and be paid for it. This one was published on April Fool's Day, so I had to read it about 4 times to make sure it wasn't a joke. It seems legit. I'm going to go on record. It's based on an interview with a gentleman from Thomson Reuters. He's the chief product officer. And of course, they recently won a fair use judgment against a spinoff that was attempting to use IP in building their own AI product. One of the first cases to put this to the test, this fair use ruling. And the issue is being talked about even more today. There's like 40 or so US copyright cases that are in the courts against AI companies. You have OpenAI and Elon Musk and many others all pushing for fair use to be applied and to extend leeway to these big tech companies. So I thought it was an interesting article just to hear from the company that felt like their rights were infringed upon. So what did we learn from hearing from the Thomson Reuters chief product officer in this piece, Michael?
Well, a couple things. So the legal judgment against this Ross intelligence firm that Thomson Reuters won was related to the way that this other firm, Ross Intelligence, leveraged Thomson Reuters data and the platform that they used to create a similar platform based on the same type of data. And they went to, this article specifically went to a length to say that they didn't use it to create a generative AI system. They used it to create an AI system. So it's leveraging a similar type of system that they had before, but it was not for generative AI. Yeah. So as they talk through this, again, they mentioned fair use. And again, the judgment here said that this wasn't fair use for that. However, it still brings up the discussion points of how do firms who generate content see, or would they see, a fair use being enacted within an AI or generative AI context for training a model? And, the discussions were there. Is like, one of the quotes is, there's obviously public good for this, but there needs to be a mechanism for them to make sure that they can be fairly compensated for it.
Right.
And I understand that to a certain extent. And this is where this is a very strange and fine line, because you think about it from a person's perspective. I can go to a library and check out a book. Now, that book was purchased once, right?
Yeah.
And I can now make use of that book from the library that was purchased once and learn from it. And then I can tell you what I learned from a book that was purchased once by the library about the things I found interesting or what I read in it. Now, that's just even beyond the fact that my neighbor can also check out that same book, and others in the town can check out that same book purchased once.
Yeah.
And each of us now can go tell our friends what we learned from the book that was only purchased once. So you're seeing this cascading effect of something that already exists. The content was purchased one time, and now it's being leveraged by many, many other people. So is this a case where these firms like Thomson Reuters or any of the other content producers would be satisfied if a firm said, we will purchase a copy of all of your materials at some price and then allow that content to be leveraged throughout? Or are they going to continue to look for royalty activities or some other action to help them be fairly compensated for this? Yeah. And I don't know what fair compensation is anymore, because in the example I just used, that one book now trained dozens of people or whatever it is, and changed the way they thought about things or whatever it could be, right? Yeah. So how does this apply to an AI model, which has now theoretically learned this information and now can provide, let's say, updates or some kind of response based on the information it learned? It may not be spitting the words out word for word, right? But it may be leveraging the learnings from that material to provide a different kind of summarized insight. Where does that line be drawn? And that's why I think it's very difficult for the courts to address this, because there is already something in place that for humans that exists right now. And this AI model looks just so different to it that it's unclear how a fair use could apply. So,
so very true. There was one quote from the article that I think sums up the point of view of Thomson Reuters, but I think it applies to many out there that are worried about copyrights and IP infringement. He said, it's very important that the incentives are aligned so that writers are incented to write, that people training and managing those systems are incented to do so, and that model creators are incented to create better models. If we think that superintelligence will have the abilities of a human, then that human should be able to pay for its education. I think that kind of encapsulated what this gentleman had to say throughout the interview. And I think he's got some bold aspirations there about how maybe the contributors of that content can be compensated, and we can kind of balance things out. It's just such a big problem. I don't really know how they could do that well or get to that place. So much is riding on positions that the U.S. government is going to take, which we'll know about in a few months, and then the European Union and other global economies that are all trying to grapple with this issue. It's such a big one. It's probably one of the biggest that is sitting out there weighing, bearing down on the tech sector. So
what's interesting too is that even within this article, so the representative from Thomson Reuters himself said, we're already seeing places where we ourselves are using AI in our teams to produce and write content.
That's right.
So this isn't like something that like, well, we're staying away from this stuff because we're so pure on this stuff. So it's really interesting to see that he acknowledges the fact They're
I'm
using
sure
the same
none of those
technologies.
models they're using were trained on
I'm
copyrighted
sure
material.
they would never be trained on
They turned their eyes away from.
from anyone else's content. Exactly. So anyway, this is a big challenge when you have
Yeah.
producers of content
Yeah.
who are now, I don't know, objecting to the fact that AI could be using their content to train the models, when in fact,
Right.
they use someone else's content inadvertently to create the content that they're producing. So, like you said, this is definitely not clear cut.
The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this Pulse Check. Thank you for joining us. Remember, we publish another podcast every week with an incredible guest. So be sure and check that out. And we'll see you next time on the Pulse Check. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of enterprise AI, subscribe now. The future of work is here.